In today's episode, we're going to discuss comic opera, its origins, and its future in the opera world. Opera is perceived and perpetuated as serious in TV, films, and cartoons. Do we believe this high art form is too lofty for jokes? It is painted in a limited perspective that leads people to believe the art form takes itself seriously and will bore you to tears. Why are new operas also serious? Have we forgotten the incredible impact of satire, farce, and witty jokes? That's what we're going to discuss today. I hope you enjoy. Hello, this is Opera Unbound, a podcast that breaks the barriers between opera singers and the audience. We will cover the process, challenges, stereotypes, and inspirations associated with opera. I'm Rachel Moss, the host, and this is my co-host,
Mike Heitman.
You can learn more about our podcast at www.patreon.com/operaunbound.
No, I'm good. That was great.
All right. So we'll start off with just a very brief history of comic opera. Its origins were born out of the commedia dell'arte theater form in Italy, which used different masks that represented stock characters or archetypes, and used improv and sketch comedy. This was first put with music in 1637 in an opera, or we're going to call it an opera, by Rispigliosi and Mazziocchi. And this opera was called Chi soffre speri. And then a second opera in 1653 called Dal mele bene, again involving Rispigliosi and composers Abatini and Marazzoli. And then we have this, rich history of comic operas, particularly being done in a particular theater in Naples, Italy. And the one opera in this 100-year time period that is still performed today is La Seva Padrona, which is an intermezzo, a small, short opera played between the acts of a serious opera, and that is by Pergolosi in 1731. And the one other major opera that led to the creation of comic opera and opera buffo is The Beggar's Opera, a ballad opera that was written in 1728 by John Gay in England. Ballad operas were satire musical plays that used some of the conventions of opera but without recit, so they had spoken dialogue. They used music, popular ballads, opera arias, church hymns, and folk tunes, and then set their own lyrics to it to create a story. After 1750, we really saw a huge breadth of operas being composed in this comic opera style. Think about all of the Mozart operas, The Marriage of Figaro, Così fan tutte, The Abduction from Seraglio, and then nearly every Rossini opera, La Cenerentola, The Barber of Seville, Cantori, and several others throughout history that are in this comic style. So why then, if we have a well-documented history of comic operas and comic operas still being done today, is opera only represented in popular culture as being serious? What are your thoughts, Mike?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. And I think you can kind of look at it from the perspective of how our country is with other things. And I don't think that this is an overt thing necessarily, but it's something that just hasn't been corrected. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. And that is narrative. Okay? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to get into political and social stuff about it, but we know that narratives are powerful, right? If you say a thing over and over and over again, whether or not it is true or not, people tend to believe it. In our culture, when we see opera not in the opera house, it's always either in some serious form in a movie or in a commercial, or, I mean, it's not just opera, classical music too, but how many times have we heard something from Carmen or The Marriage of Figaro in like a beef commercial or, or I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's just, people don't know what they don't know. And so that's honestly one of the things that both Rachel and I are passionate about, is just introducing opera in a way that helps open people's eyes. And comedy, I think, is honestly the easiest way. Now, of course, we talk about with our friends and we get the question a lot, well, if somebody's new to opera, then what are like the top 3 or 5 shows you would have them go and see as the first thing? And 9 times out of 10, we pick a comedy. Now, granted, you have ones that are kind of a mix. Like Bohème is a mix. It is very dramatic, of course, but there are some pretty funny moments in it. Carmen is mostly dramatic, but it's got great music. And I would say after that, I mean, maybe Traviata, you might do that one as a first one, but all the rest are going to be comedic. The Giovannis, the Figaros, the Barber of Sevilles, the anything by Offenbach, pretty much, if you want to go that route. Or even Pirates of Penzance, which isn't full opera, but at least closer.
Yeah, it's funny if talking about suggestions. I always suggest the Magic Flute or something like the Barber of Seville. People have suggested Madame Butterfly as a first opera. I don't suggest that one as a first opera.
Nope. Bad idea genes are on that person. That's a horrendous idea. Unless, well, I'm not going to get into why a person may or may not think or may want to go to that as their first one, because I don't think it's my place. But I think it's just easier to draw people in with comedy. I mean, especially in these trying and unprecedented times, we need levity. We need something that takes us out of our potentially really horrendous lives. I mean, that's always been my feeling about what performance art is. Especially. I mean, you can, of course, get it from other forms of art. It's just easier for me, at least, to connect with performance art. And it's to take you, if only for 3 minutes of a choral piece in a concert. You can listen to the whole entire other thing, but there's that 3-minute song, whatever it is, that just moves you. That is the whole point. Mm-hmm. And so I think connecting with people is a lot easier through comedy and just silliness right now, especially, than going for the scene where Lucia goes crazy.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Do we want to go maybe into a more analysis of a few of these comic operas?
Let's talk about one of these infamous comedic operas. I think in the top 5, I think pretty much every opera singer and opera aficionado, whether or not Mozart is their favorite composer, I think most people would say within the top 5, The Marriage of Figaro is one of the best comedic operas ever written, and completely relatable, even though it's talking a lot about the power struggle between nobility and the lower class and all that stuff. It's a great opera. And so we'll just talk a little bit about the plot. And I think you'll see that these are, well, if we take aside the nobility angle, but we just talk about power struggles, I think you'll see these kinds of situations are really not that different from a lot of things we see in, on Netflix and all that stuff. So we start off, beginning of the show, it's Figaro and Suzanna's wedding day. And by the way, the subtitle for this is The Day of Madness, which, holy cow, it's a crazy day. It's even weird to even think about this all happening within one day. Supposedly, in Beaumarchais' original book, this all takes place in one day, which Beaumarchais, this is book 2 of the trilogy that has The Marriage of Figaro, which is the second book. The Barber of Seville is the first one. So ironically, the second book was composed first before at least in the popular versions of these shows, because there are other versions of The Barber of Seville, for example.
Yes.
I can't remember if there's another version of Figaro, but so, okay, Barber of Seville, Marriage of Figaro, and then The Guilty Mother, which there was eventually one of those written in the 1970s. I know it's after 1950. And then, of course, we have a side thing, which is the Ghost of Versailles, which is a Corleone opera, but that's a separate thing. As everyone who has been married or been a bridesmaid knows, your wedding day is crazy. Like I mentioned, it's the day of their wedding. We come in. Figaro, like a lot of dudes. I'm sorry, guys. I'm throwing us under the bus here. We're thinking about only certain things on the wedding day, especially if you look at that time period where everybody waited to consummate their marriage, or at least a lot of people did. That was kind of the norm. He starts off the show measuring their room that they just got from the Count, which is in a different part of the palace, for the bed that's going to go there. He's got one track mind. So anyway, he's measuring it, and Suzanna comes in, and she's like, hey, Figaro, check this out. But he's just like so intent on figuring this thing out. Where's the bed going to go? Is it going to go there? Is it going to go here? And she has her veil. And she's like, Figaro, look at me. I have the veil for our wedding. He's like, no. Yeah, it looks beautiful. It's cool. Whatever. I got this bed thing going on. And eventually she gets his attention and he looks at her and he realizes that, yes, she looks beautiful. And he gets excited. And, okay, so they sing this duet. Well, first she's like, what are you doing, dude? And he's like, well, I'm measuring the bed for our new bedroom. And I'm like, wait, we have a new bedroom? Who got us the new bedroom? It's like, the Count did. And she's like, the Count got us this? You realize it's next to his, like, office. Basically, the whole point from the Count's perspective is to get both of them closer to him. Figaro believes it's because it's to help him with his job, because Figaro is the Count's servant, and Suzanna is the Countess's servant. But really, the Count wants to get Suzanna closer because he's got a thing for her. Now, without getting into too many details, because I could go on forever about this show, one of the main cruxes of this show is this idea of prima nocte. The Counts, at the time, because of their position, they could be the first person to have sex with any peasant on the night of their wedding before the husband. Obviously, wrong, but that's how it was. And so his whole idea is, well, she'll just be closer and she's cute and blah, blah, blah. She informs Figaro about this. Of course, he's mad. And so the whole gist of the show is trying to not make that happen. As we go through the show, we're introduced, obviously, eventually to the Countess, and then also everybody's favorite 15-year-old boy, Cherubino, who has a thing for the Countess. And, of course, he's hormones ablaze. And he's also a thorn in the Count's side. And every time something bad happens for the Count, Cherubino is usually the cause of it. Eventually, the Count comes in to visit Suzanna and before the wedding and like, hey, how you doing? And remember the things that we talked about and all this stuff. And the thing is that prior to that scene, Cherubino was in the room talking to Suzanna. So Cherubino's hiding. And eventually the Count is talking about how he went to Barbarina's house and he's telling this story and Barbarina is all acting weird. And then as he is telling the story about this, he discovers Cherubino. And so, of course, he's mad. And Cherubino's trying to not die because the Count literally either would kill him in that moment or wants to get him done. Instead of doing that, for once he did something good. And he just sent him off to war. So he doesn't do it himself. He's like, you know what? Just get out. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of Act 1. Act 2, the Countess comes on. She's, of course, she knows what's going on with the Count. At least that he's not faithful to her. She's upset about it. Suzanna tries to comfort her. Eventually, Cherubino comes back. And there's this whole, like, thing, you know, because it's an older lady with a 15-year-old boy, which, of course, now in today's terms is not at all cool. But back then, age differences like that and the actual age of Cherubino was a separate issue. And so Cherubino sings a song to her. Eventually, the Count knocks on the door, so Cherubino has to hide. And Count suspects something's going on. And the Countess is trying to make up excuses as to what it might be. But then he's like, no, I'm going to figure this out. And he leaves. So Cherubino has to jump out the window. And he's freaking out and he runs out, okay? Count comes back in. Oh, and prior to Cherubino jumping out the window, the Count hears something and he thinks it's, Yeah, he thinks it's Cherubino, so that's why he goes out to get like a hatchet or something. Okay, so when he comes back in, the thing is that remember that Cherubino and Suzanna and the Countess were all in the room prior to the Count coming. So actually, when Cherubino jumps out of the window, Suzanna goes into the closet. Okay, so now the Count thinks that Cherubino's in the closet. He comes in, Suzanna, so now he's got to apologize. There's this humanity relationship thing going on. And then a bunch of craziness ensues because Figaro comes in and they're trying to figure out what happened to this guy who jumped out the window, because Antonio comes in and tells the Count that he's in the garden, somebody jumped out the window, messed up his flowers because he's the gardener, and he's of course upset about it. Yeah, it's just a bunch of chaos. The second act, sorry, this is kind of long-winded, but then eventually we get into the crux of some of the bad stuff that happens, which is the Count comes out at the beginning of Act 3, and he is like really upset because he wants to be with Suzanna, and he also insinuates that the Countess is too stupid to figure out what he's doing. Suzanna comes on, and she has this plan to help the Countess get through the situation and to catch the Count in his act. Okay, they have this duet where she promises to meet him in the garden later. And that's all well and good. She leaves, but then right as she's leaving, Figaro peeks around the corner and is like, hey, what's up? And she's like, everything's going to plan. And then they walk off, and the Count is like, wait. They have a plan? And then he really wants to make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, fast forward through a lot more. We get to the end of the opera, and they're at night. She's meeting in the garden, and the Count is trying to figure out who's who, but actually it's the Countess is in the garden dressed as Suzanna. And so when the Count comes in, because it's dark, he doesn't realize that it's the Countess. So he's like acting as if it's Suzanna and like flirting with her, all this stuff. And of course, he doesn't know that it's the Countess. And then later on, at the end of the opera, the Count is trying to accuse the Countess of wrongdoing because Figaro and Suzanna, because Suzanna comes on later and Figaro also, they do arias, blah, blah, blah. He sees Figaro and who he thinks is the Countess, because Suzanna is dressed as the Countess. And so he tries to catch essentially Figaro doing things with the Countess. He, of course, is mad, tries to make a fuss. And then he's like, I'm not going to accept this kind of behavior. And then, as per usual with dramatic scenes, the Countess comes out and is like, oh, really? You're not going to accept it? And then he realizes that because she is dressed as Suzanna still, that he was actually the one who was doing the bad stuff all along. And on top of that, well, he knew he was doing bad stuff, but on top of that, it's in front of everybody. He's humiliated. But in the end, we do have a moment which many people disagree as to whether, because they do make up. And it's a beautiful moment, really simple music. It's one of my favorite just little vignettes in that show and in a Mozart opera just in general. But then the end of the show, of course, people who are thinking, well, okay, so they made up in that moment, but do they really stay together? And then there are some directors that will take the idea of, no, she shouldn't put up with that. And by the end, like, they make up in that moment in front of everybody, but then as the play out of the show, which isn't that much more, they basically drift apart. It's kind of the same thing they do with Così, where people do or do not end up together depending on who's directing it at the end of the show. So, long-winded. The show's like, 3 hours long?
Uncut, it's nearly 4.
Yeah, so it's a long haul, but it's really, really good. And there's so many clips of it online if you want to just dabble in there. And there's other characters, too, that I didn't even mention, like Bartolo and Marcellina. Oh, and I forgot, because I forgot one of my favorite comedic moments in this whole show. So, part of Figaro's issue is that he has a lot of debt. And Bartolo has a lot of money. In order to pay some debts, Bartolo and Marcellina have worked out this thing, because Marcellina is like this old lady who has a crush on Figaro. And Figaro, of course, is getting married, but even on top of that, he doesn't like her that way. But then it comes out in this one scene that Figaro is actually the child of Marcellina and Bartolo. And so they have this really wonderful reconnecting and like kind of setting aside all their issues. And of course, the Count is pissed. And then Suzanna comes on, And while Figaro is hugging Marcellina, and she's got the money to pay for Figaro's debts, and she sees this thing where Figaro is essentially hugging his nemesis at that point, other than the Count. She's like, what's going on? And Figaro's like, well, look, it's my mom and dad. And she's like, your mom and dad? And she's like, no, it really is. And she actually I forgot to mention this one. She's like, he's basically saying like, no, it's not what it is. It's not what it is. And she slaps him. She's like, no, I know what it is. I know you, man. You're just like the Count. I can't believe you on our wedding. Could you? How? You know, that whole like overreaction. But there's the reuniting and happy families and all this stuff. And then basically everybody's against the Count at that point. Or at least not in favor of. Let me put it that way. So... Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm done.
No, it really is a great opera. And like I know we said that like uncut it's 4 hours, but everyone cuts it, so it's more like 2.5 to 3.
Yeah.
There are just things that aren't parts of it that aren't performed anymore. The great thing about this opera is it is still widely performed. You can, throw a dart, and no matter where you throw it, you're going to find a company that's doing it in the US.
Totally.
Another great comedic opera is Gianni Schicchi by Puccini. It's only about an hour long, and it usually is performed with one of the other operas that he wrote it with. So he wrote 3 operas that were supposed to be performed together, but they're not done that way anymore. Yeah, so it's called Il Trittico. Il Taboro, which is the cloak. And it's a serious drama. And then you have Gianni Schicchi, which is the funny one. Mm-hmm. And then Suor Angelica, which was Puccini's favorite opera, by the way. But anyways, Gianni Schicchi is set during the early Renaissance period. And what has happened is there's a group of, it's either 4 or I think it's 5 people who are related to this character called Buoso. And Buoso has died, and they're all fighting over what they're gonna get out of his will. Mm-hmm. So first he's dead, and they have a notary come to finish the will, which they've found the will, and they've read through it. Like, what are they gonna get? One of the things is obviously the property, right? There's a property, and there's a mill for grains, right? And not like a personal mill, like a big mill, and a donkey. And so they're all fighting over who's going to get what. And the whole opera is called Gianni Schicchi, and he actually is not a family member, but an individual who comes in, and they're like, okay, so if you pretend to be Buoso, because they've all found him dead, but the notary doesn't know he's dead. They bargain with Skiki to pretend to be Buoso long enough for the notary to rewrite the will so that they get what they want. So they're all bargaining with him, and I'm going to be much more succinct, and spoiler alert, he tricks them all, and he takes everything. It's a great opera, and probably the most famous part of it, of course, is the aria Il mio bambino caro by Lauretta, as she's trying to convince her dad to give her something. Mm-hmm. It's an hour long. It's usually put with another one of the operas, or sometimes it's done with Pagliacci by Leoncavallo. And I think it's great for the fact that it's short, and it's has so many different characters, and just a ridiculous situation, but also a situation that happens in life. Mm-hmm. People do this to their family members.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. People are terrible.
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to go off of that a couple things. One, actually, you mentioned that this happens to people. This literally happened in my family with my grandparents. I'm not going to get into that, but it's potentially horrendous. Goes all the way to getting lawyers involved, and it gets ugly. And the reason why I bring that up is because, again, there are so many things that are relatable in these shows, even though many of them were written centuries ago. They don't it's not like only the modern operas are relatable. No. There's plenty there. And then I'll talk about one more, even shorter, not to one-up you, Rachel, but I'll give you a shorter opera that's also comedic, and that is The Telephone by Minati. And this, just suffice it to say, guy comes home, he's been dating this girl for who knows how long, but he wants to propose to her. But he's got to go out of town on business, and so he's got a little window of time, and she will not get off the damn phone. People keep calling her, and she has her various gossipy things and dramatic things. And he's just like, okay, well, can I talk to you just for a second? Can you put that away? I mean, how is that not relatable to today? I did this show as an outreach tour to elementary schoolers in 2016 or 17, something like that. Even kids get it. Like kindergartners can understand this show. And spoiler alert, at the end of the day, he eventually like storms off, and she's like, whoa, wait a minute. Maybe he was trying to tell me something. Maybe it was important. Maybe I was kind of a colossal idiot. He eventually calls her from the airport. And it's like, hey, will you marry me? And she's like, of course I will. It's really cute. And also very easy to produce if you are one of those types listening to this podcast. It's a real winner.
It's only 2 characters.
Yeah, it's just Ben and I can't remember what the soprano's name is.
That's okay. They can look it up. Okay, we've given you a glimpse into what these comic operas are like. Let's just kind of run through a list of comic operas. So we mentioned the Mozart operas, Magic Flute, Le Notte di Figaro, Così fan tutte, The Abduction from Seraglio. Don Giovanni is sometimes, it's dramatic, but there's funny parts in it.
Yeah.
Right? Leporello's whole character. A few by Donizetti. We have L'Esir d'Amore, Don Pasquale, La Fille du Régiment, Falstaff by Verdi, which is a Shakespeare play. There's a Twelfth Night opera, which is also another Shakespeare play that's, very famous. And I think there's a Cyrano de Bergerac opera. Might have to double check that one, I'm not sure. Nearly every Rossini opera is a comedy.
Yeah.
So just, find a Rossini opera, they're all funny. Massenet has Cendrillon, which is pretty funny, right? The Cinderella story, although we don't necessarily think of it as funny, anytime you have the stepsisters and the mother, I don't know, that it doesn't matter who sets it. They seem to make a big deal out of making their characters just so ridiculous that they're funny.
Yeah, exactly.
Die Fledermaus. I like to put this one in here. Ariadne auf Naxos by Strauss.
Oh,
because
yeah.
It's the whole play within a play. Mm-hmm. The whole situation is they're putting on a play for the royalty member that they've been hired by, and trying to get it all together and all that. So I think that's a good one.
Yeah.
How about you, Mike? You got some?
Well, I was just going to say, one composer that often is not associated with comedy, and I'm not even going to say that this is a barn burner in comedic fashion, but Wagner wrote one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that guy. Meistersinger is technically a comedic opera.
Yes.
Obviously, a lot of Offenbach is. If you're going to go with, Rossini, it's basically all comedic. The other duo that's like that is Gilbert and Sullivan, of course.
Right, yes, operetta.
Yeah, if we're going into that category. Gounod wrote a piece called Le Médecin Malgré, and it's a really funny story. Again, this is a shorter opera. I don't know how long it is, though, and it's only 4 characters, I think, but I did an aria from it, and to just give you an idea of how this thing starts out, you have a husband and wife who apparently have issues at home, and they get in an argument, and the dude is a lumberjack, and he thinks it's a good idea to get drunk and go talk to his wife. So, I mean, there's no killing or anything like that. And then there's these 2 friends that are trying to help him through it. Another one, if we're going with these shorter shows, one show that we talked about both in the podcast and prior to recording is Serva Padrona. Okay, so we did mention that one. And then another one is called Pimpinone, which is by Telemann, which a lot of people call the Pimpinone the B version of Serva Padrona. Serva Padrona is a little bit better, but it's basically the same story. Yeah. And I think it's hilarious because it's great music. I happen to be partial to the Baroque period. I think the music's just great, but it's very good at playing, the duets and stuff between each other, and the relationship dynamics that often happen between men and women. Bohème is kind of like Giovanni, where it's half and half. Once you get past that, it's more like there's comedic scenes in opera, but the thing may not necessarily be a full comedic opera like we would expect.
Yeah, I mean, you have Lahar, who's written some comedic operas, and Flotto, and there's some other Johann Strauss operas, the guy who wrote Fledermaus. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple operas I wanted to mention. Cherubini's Alibaba. I saw a company did a production of that, and it looked hilarious. I didn't see it, but it looked very good. And then an opera that got a lot of love when it was premiered was Le Don Blanche by French composer François-Andrien Boidieu. If you want to look into that, it's supposed to be pretty funny. And then I just wanted to mention, and The Love of Three Oranges by Prokofiev is getting like a huge revival right now throughout the United States and Europe, which is this man goes into the desert with a clown, I think, and he's like trying to discover, like, find his love, his true love, and these three oranges turn into three princesses, and it's a really strange setting, but people seem to love the opera. So a list of kind of like modern operas that are in the comic vein. We have the Pants opera, which is a short opera having to do with the whole 2016 election with Trump and Hillary. Mm-hmm. Bon Appetit by Lee Hoiby. And he also did The Italian Lesson. That's another great short comedic opera. And then Sweeney Todd, and this is one of those like done by musical theater companies and done by opera companies. It kind of falls in between, is a dark comedy.
Yeah.
Let's call it that.
To say the least.
And then Great Scott by Jake Heggie is this kind of farce situation about an American opera company that's trying to survive, and they're having this production, and they're trying to make enough money to keep the opera company going, and this football team is having their national championship on the same night. So that's this crazy situation that the opera company has to overcome. And then the last opera, which I think just came out a couple years ago, is Connection Lost, the tender opera. Yeah, it came out in 2016. And the whole thing is on YouTube, actually. It's about 12 minutes long. So, yeah, there are modern operas that are comedic, but it seems that there are far fewer that are making it on major opera stages, which, Mike and I will discuss shortly why we believe that is. And for me, I think that opera companies have a hard time taking a risk. And we're definitely obviously talking about this in the pre-pandemic timeline. There are very few opera companies doing any opera right now.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to do it with excuse me, it's pretty hard to do it with all the various restrictions in different states. And then actually, it's interesting, I was talking to a friend yesterday who happens to work at Seattle Opera. He was mentioning, they had canceled the next show in the fall, and they're just taking it one opera at a time, which I think is smart. Companies can do what they want, but I think that we just don't know when things are going to open up. So I think canceling to a particular date in the future may or may not be the best strategy. And so they're taking it one step at a time. I think that's good. But he mentioned that even if they lifted the restrictions for arenas and stuff like that, how many people are going to go?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
It's just tough for companies.
Obviously, all the performers like us involved.
Yeah, whether we want to be a part of it. Now, going back to why some companies don't really do these modern comedic operas, I definitely agree with Rachel. There is the financial risk. And I think it's two other things. One, it's not like there aren't funny people out there, right? There's plenty of funny people that know how to write. I don't know. Maybe I'm tooting my own horn. I think I'm a pretty funny person in the things that I write, but I also understand that the things that I write, because sometimes I do want to push the envelope. Some companies may think that if, like, let's say they're okay with it, but the thing gets produced and then they get backlash from it, they don't want to deal with that. There's that whole thing. There's also, and this is a legit thing and it's a good thing, but there can be balance too. There are a lot of stories that have never, ever, ever been told in opera. Specifically, things with LGBT and other situations with race. I mean, yes, we have the token shows, the Porgy and Besses, the Mikados, the Madame Butterflies, all that stuff. Yeah, those have been done for a while, although Porgy and Bess has really exploded the last few years. But there's a lot of new operas that are being written about race in a different way, and also taking into consideration things that have happened after Porgy, right? Like they had the Central Park 5 opera. That was in the 70s or 80s when it happened, and it just recently was made into an opera. So those are legitimate things that are good, because I don't think any story should not be told in any art form. Like not to spoil anything, but I'm currently working on a human trafficking opera.
Oh, cool.
That's one about Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein being in the public eye the way that he is now did not happen until, a year and a half ago, to where it was getting lots of news and all that. So
it might have been 2, maybe 3 years, some small mentions, but it really exploded in the last year and a half.
There's lots of things that need to be done, or that are interesting stories that people can relate to, which again, they don't all have to be comedic, but there's reasons why I think there's been such a focus in, and obviously with those shows, it's not only something that people relate to, but it also potentially brings in new audiences, because for a long time, my understanding is there may have been people in the LGBT community that's like, well, you have many artists that happen to be LGBT. That's wonderful. But you're not telling stories I can relate to, or I can only relate to so much. Yeah. It's good that you're now doing these other things.
Yeah. I guess my thing about it is, like, we have things like Saturday Night Live, which, I mean, Saturday Night Live's been on the air,
45 years probably at this point.
Yeah. It hasn't lost popularity in the last 5 years, has it? People love Saturday Night Live.
With Saturday Night Live and its viewership, I don't know what the numbers are, but I think it's because there are a lot of people who don't like, from what I've read, the direction it's going in. So you're losing some of those older fans, but you're gaining new ones, essentially, because of the direction it's going. So I don't know.
I kind of don't understand why opera companies or composers aren't investing in having a certain number of things be comedic operas in their season, or I don't know, starting an opera improv night.
Oh, I love that idea.
Just see what happens, That's...
I don't know what the deal is. And actually, you know what? I think I'm going to refute the point that I just made earlier. Because it goes into my soapbox that I did the last time we published something. Because you bring up a really great point about Saturday Night Live. And I would even add into that things like South Park, Family Guy, Simpsons. These TV shows, they always get backlash, yet they're still here. You could even go back as far as Monty Python, maybe, and how ridiculous that was for its time.
Sure.
Why then are companies so afraid? Because again, it's kind of like we just talked about with Saturday Night Live. Yes, you'll lose some fans potentially, but you'll gain others. And one of the things we've talked about a lot on this podcast is how do we get younger, newer audiences? You're not going to get it if you do the same stupid thing over and over and over again. You got to reach these people in a new way. And maybe... Especially since across the United States that subscriptions to an entire season at opera companies has been down for at least 5 to 10 years. Oh,
that
totally.
used to be what would keep opera companies alive, and they've had to change their strategies and try and reach new audiences that aren't the target audience that they used to advertise to.
A lot of people just in general are not thinking, because they can't most of the time, aren't thinking that far ahead, even if they have the money. Because I'm sure the subscription, part of the problem is the cost, right? Even though it's probably cheaper than buying them individually.
Yes.
The cost, number one, but two, they may not know what they're going to be doing then. Or this whole idea of FOMO,
Yes.
right? The fear of missing out. Well, what if
Yes.
you buy the subscription and then you got this amazing event that you don't know about when you buy it, and then you have to cancel, you may not be able to sell the tickets to someone else, and you're out that money and all this stuff. So it's just easier to buy one show at a time and potentially pay more for that show, but then you're not losing it because you can't go or don't want to go to a particular show because you bought the season.
Yeah, exactly.
I think definitely the adaptation, some companies have been more successful at that than others, but I think if they focus also more on the kinds of shows that they're doing and reach a broader audience, whether they like it or not, they have to acknowledge, just based on what you can see in our society and in the news and all this stuff, I think it's pretty fair to say that everybody would agree that we are pretty divided right now as a country. I'm not going to get into why we're divided, but we are. So logically speaking, would it not make sense to, like, let's say you take a company like Seattle who does 5 shows a year, okay? Why don't you pick, say, 2 that's going to definitely appeal to everybody, regardless of whatever their political or social leanings are? You have 1 for Group A, 1 for Group B, so now you're at 4 shows, and then you can take the 5th show and have it be a wild card. Whether, depending on the shows that you're doing, it could be one, again, that's for everybody, so you make up any losses, or, you know, because this situation is not going to go away quickly, regardless of who gets elected in our country. That's one thing that I've always seen and have tried to be the megaphone on when it comes to when you do something new or different, you're slanting it in only one direction, and that's not going to work out for you long term.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people assume that comedy is going to have a political slant, but there are definitely plenty of types of comedy that don't have to be that way, right?
Oh, totally.
And I think if a company is not wanting to be political, that they can find those types of stories or create those types of stories.
And it goes into the whole ballot idea that you were talking about. Why are there not more people like me? And I'm trying really not to toot my horn, but I think it's just such a simple idea. Why don't you find some people, especially if you're in a major metropolitan city, you're telling me there's no writers there? Really?
Right.
Nobody that's funny. You have to go with one of these other people. Now, of course, you can argue, okay, there's name recognition, so maybe that helps with a writer. Okay, fine. But why not rewrite these shows so that, like, you can take music that's already been written. That is the thing. You can take the best music, put it together, so at least, they won't be complaining about the music. It won't suck unless you just suck at picking music, which that's a bigger problem, I think, for your company.
Right. And obviously with opera, primarily being the, what we consider like the golden age of opera, all being prior to public domain, it's really easy to take that material and rewrite the story / words, like we said, it doesn't all have to be from the same show. It can be from different shows, and you can create whatever sort of narrative you want.
Yeah. One of my favorite shows, and sadly, because I lived out in New York, the only show I've ever seen was when I did an audition at the Met, at least. The only show I ever saw at the Met, and it was only because I was doing an audition in New York a while ago, was The Enchanted Island, which is a pastiche, which is the same kind of idea where you're taking different music from all kinds of... The theme was Baroque operas, okay? Or Baroque music. So they took all kinds of stuff from that, and then they rewrote a story about this enchanted island. And it was so cool. There's no reason why companies cannot do that and find somebody who happens to be hilarious. They have to also concede, too, a little bit, that there are going to be things that are funny, that aren't going to be funny to them, but will be funny to somebody in the audience. That's one of the things with opera companies, and I don't have numbers, so I'm going out on a limb. But my assumption is that a lot of the people who are in the leadership of these companies, and especially in the musical staff and like who chooses what shows, they're all of a particular political and social leaning. I don't really think it's very diverse. There may be one person that bucks against it.
We all know that the administration level of opera companies across, honestly, the world is not very diverse. And that is an issue.
Yeah, it's a huge issue. So let's say your board or who's ever making those decisions is, 6 people, and 4 of them don't find a few of the jokes funny, but the 2 that actually get them find them hysterical. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do the show because it was 4-2. Comedy is such a relative thing. Like, I happen to be one of those people who loves dark humor, and the more horrendous it is, because I know that they're doing it on purpose to be horrendous. I know that they're not actual statements. Some people blur those lines. Whatever. Yes. That's their prerogative. It's just something that you can't throw away a show just because a few of the jokes weren't to your tasting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of, I like dark comedy as well, and I also really like witty comedy. That's probably my favorite. I think we've kind of covered all we want to cover on this topic, but we'd love to hear from you listeners what you'd like to see in a comedic opera show, or if you have a plot idea. Is there a favorite story that you've read that you're like, why is this not an opera? Let's get the idea out there in the world. Leave us a comment and let us know.
We'll even post, Rachel and I were talking prior to recording about some of our favorite scenes in operas. We didn't mention a bunch of them in this podcast. We can put together a little playlist like we did with the Ultimate Opera playlist of just stuff to go with this, so you can just check them out and see that there are really funny moments, and then also some other ones that are just cool. That way you can see more than just somebody stabbing another person and think that that's opera. So
thanks for listening to this podcast episode. We hope you enjoyed it. We'd love to hear your thoughts and requests, so leave us a comment below. For more information about the podcast or for extras, check out our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/operaunbound. You can help support the creation of this and much more content for as little as $3 a month. Like and subscribe to our channel, and also follow us on Instagram at Opera Unbound to stay updated. Ciao!